The story begins when a sudden powerful explosion rocks one of the isekai islands, leaving the nearby town in a blaze. Jinji grabs Yukido as they join the other residents who are evacuating. Inu, the mayor of the city, tries to keep orders as people fanatically try to board the ferries. Jinji rushes over to him as he worries about his seniors Ibuki and Haruaki. However, the mayor assures him that their master Yanagi went to get them. He already knows what it means if Yanagi doesn't return. This comment causes Yukido to have a worried look on his face. During that interval, the master stands at the origin of the explosion as the lava flows around him. He faces a huge flame-type Aramatama, and looking at its threat level, he is certain that this is his last job. All the while, Haruaki manages to escape with an injured Ibuki to a nearby island, but he collapses just as they arrive safely. Ibuki regains consciousness and calls to him, but Haruaki's injuries are severe. Back at the sea, the residents complete their evacuation and watch on with confused expressions as their home burns. A couple of years have passed since that incident, and Yukido is now on the mainland staying at a foster home. One night he receives a letter from Inu informing him that he will be taking guardianship of him when he graduates middle school. This means he's to move back to his birth island where he will complete high school and live a new life. Since he left the island when he was young, Yukido doesn't have strong memories of his time there, meaning he doesn't recall Inu, who claims to be his late father's friend. He decides to get some sleep and gets a reoccurring dream where he is underwater alone. However, it feels strangely pleasant as he is someone who avoids getting close to people. A hand appears and pulls him out of the water, which triggers him to wake up, but his eyes glow an ocean blue as the water in the bottle next to him moves violently. He sits up wondering what is going on. The day of his graduation finally comes, and after their leaving ceremony, the other students mingle with each other for the final time, but Yukido prepares to leave right away. His teacher stops and congratulates him on his graduation, but she comments that it's selfish that his father's friend decided to come to claim him at such a time. Yukido is not bothered about that. He thanks his teacher and quickly leaves before she can add anything else. During his stay at the foster home, all the people around him were nice, so he didn't have any issues with maltreatment. His thoughts are ended when he sees that the student's attention is drawn by an unknown character at the front of the school. Yukido looks for himself, and it is Jinji, who has already had a few cans of happy juice. Yukido doesn't recognize the rowdy guy and tries to pretend that he has the wrong person when Jinji recognizes him. His senior comments on how much he's grown, but Yukido just walks past him, but the stranger follows. To prove that he has the right person, Jinji pushes him off a bridge. While in the water, Yukido's powers begins to activate, but Jinji uses a technique to stop it from fully manifesting, to the boy's surprise. Now that he has Yukido's attention, he uses a technique that allows his bag to engulf him. Yukido regains consciousness on a boat heading to the Isekai Islands. The boat driver comments that Jinji is known for his craziness. The rowdy guy informs Yukido that his things will be shipped from his foster home later. Jinji shoots out Yukido's things from his Mary Poppins bag, to the boy's surprise. At this point, Yukido is confused about what is going on. Jinji is shocked that Inu didn't tell him about the world they live in and formally introduces himself as an older brother figure. Jinji informs Yukido that his father was his master and like a father figure to him. Their conversation is interrupted when the honking of the sea train catches Yukido's attention. It is the main mode of transport that connects the islands. They proceed forward till they arrive at their destination. The two are met by Momoko, who comments on how much Yukido has grown before revealing that she is the landlord of his childhood home. She adds that they once lived together like a family. Inu also introduces himself and his role on the island. On the car ride home, they hope that Jinji didn't bother him too much along the way. He already covers himself, stating that he escorted the lad like a gentleman. As they travel, Yukido is impressed with how beautiful the place looks. While Momoko gives him some information about the place, a Matama floats past, which catches his attention. After a short drive, they arrive at the home and Yukido is appreciative of them taking him in. He notices a picture of himself and his dad looking happy with the others. Jinji wants to know if it triggers any of his memories, but Yukido alerts him that it doesn't. Upon closer inspection, the boy is doubting if that man is his biological father. Someone get him on an episode of Mori. Momoko comes in with tea, stating that his father was an amazing lay master. These are people that maintain the harmony of the Isekai Islands. This is the first time he has heard of such a role. Jinji adds that they are a part of this class of people as they too have strange abilities. Yukido exposes Jinji by giving the example of him stuffing him in his magical bag. Momoko gets annoyed at the transporter, but he tries to calm her, explaining that they were just playing games. Inu changes the topic as he discloses that Jinji was Yanagi's third student. He comments that the first two are incredible. Hearing this offends Jinji as he doesn't like being compared to his seniors. He comments that they only got a head start due to them being older, which is why they are better. Jinji points out that Yakido brute forces the use of his powers now because he doesn't have the basics down. Momoko is certain that since Yakido is Yanagi's son, he must have been born with an amazing talent. The boy admits that he didn't know his father was involved in such things, and the room turns a little awkward when he asks about his mother. They explain that his father just turned up one day with him stating that he had a son. His father never spoke of his partner. Hearing that no one knows anything about his mother makes him a little sad. Inu discloses that his father wished for him to grow up on the mainland without the interference of the Ayaka Islands in the event of his death. He also gave them a time when it would be acceptable for them to call him back. They don't know his reasons for leading such instructions, but as his longtime friend, Inu is certain that it must serve a greater purpose. But he apologizes to Yakido nonetheless. The mayor officially asks him to live with them from now on, and Yakido is indifferent about where he stays, so he accepts the arrangement. He is shown to his room to settle down and is soon joined by a Matama. As he wonders what it is, Jinji comes in to explain that the Matama are the harmless ones. They are all over the island, so he will get used to them as time goes on. As the novelty wears off, Yakido realizes that Jinji just barged into his room and warns him not to do so. Jinji realizes that Yakido is very distant towards people and speculates that it might be the reason he's indifferent to where he lives. This came across when he was interacting with Momoko and Inu. The boy reveals that it was not his intention to be rude, but tries to turn it on Jinji as he complains about how he treated him. However, he doesn't fall for the topic change. This forces Yakido to reveal that in the past he lost control of his powers several times, which put the people around him in danger. To prevent further incidents, he decided to distance himself. He gets annoyed at Jinji when he realizes that the guy was not paying attention when he was being vulnerable. Yakido storms off as he tries to apologize for his actions. The boy goes on a night stroll. There he is confronted by an Aramatama that manifests as an evil water spirit. Jinji interferes just in the nick of time as Yakido stands there paralyzed in fear. He explains that the Aramatama are harmful, unlike the one in his room earlier. This one was likely attracted to the gloomy aura Yakido was projecting while on his walk. Jinji decides to use this as an opportunity to show him what his lay mastery is capable of. As the demon prepares to attack, Jinji chants while performing a hand signal which activates a power network that he consolidates at his hand. He swiftly dodges the Aramatama's assault and hits it with his charged hand, causing it to dismantle. Yakido is impressed with the display, and as Jinji basks in the admiration, the Aramatama reforms behind him. After being informed, he grabs Yakido and launches him into the water section of the demon. The boy has had enough of Jinji's shenanigans, which triggers him to unleash his power, which causes the water demon to explode. Jinji comments on how impressive his brute force is. Yakido's power then tries to attack him, but he easily dispels it with a technique. The boy is shocked that he managed to stop the attack. Jinji notes that it seems that the lad is terrified of his powers and comments that it's because he is bad at controlling them. He suggests he works on that if he's scared of losing control of them. He tries to offer his services, asking Yakido to address him as master. The Aramatama begins to disappear, and he informs the boy that it means the evil spirit has been purified, even though they didn't do it in the most elegant manner. Jinji continues his advice, stating that Yakido should be more open and wear his heart on his sleeves because they can handle his lapses. He knocks the boy on his head, which triggers a memory that he had an older brother figure when he was younger. Jinji thinks that they should celebrate, but Yakido decides to implement his advice to wear his heart on his sleeves and drop kicks Jinji into the water for all the things he has done so far. During the whole ordeal, Haruaki uses his powers to observe, and it returns to alert him of Yakido's arrival. His apprentices notices this and want more information. All the while, Ibuki finishes off a target as he searches for something. His subordinate alerts him that there were no abnormalities found in the eastern ward and asks if they will expand their search to the west. He alerts her to call it a day and head back to HQ. In the interim, Jinji and Yakido return wet, which worries Momoko at first, but she calms down a little when she realizes that Yakido seems a lot freer. Jinji steps out to see Yakido training, sat in a meditation pose with Matama surrounding him. The drunkard commends Yakido's hard work, but the shy guy is skeptical about the training. he questions his master's methods as he's not too sure if this will help him gain control over his abilities. Jinji reassures him and tells him to feel his own lei energy. This is a vital energy that flows deep in the earth and surges in massive waves below Ayaka Island. Lei masters draw upon that energy to keep their abilities under control. In Yukido's case, his own power flows unchecked, so he should be able to stabilize it by aligning himself with a massive source of power. He urges the shy guy to try using the spell he was taught the other day. He uses a hand sign alongside a chant to form a bubble of water in front of him. It quickly pops when Jinji sneezes though. The drunkard gives him a demonstration of what can be done when one's skills are honed to a higher level. He makes a humanoid water formation that he can control directly. It can be maintained for a longer time with the moisture from the air. After some good training, Yukido decides to head off and is met by Jinji looking depressed because he ran out of booze. He wanted to put drinks on his tab, but the bartender demanded he pays his previous debt, so to kill two birds with one stone, he suggests that him and Yukido purify Mitama for money. This will double up as training for Yukido. We see Yako and Shadowru look in the job request box. They note that there's been an increase in Aramitama activity since the earthquake. Yako pinches the request in the box and plans to complete it himself since their master has been quite busy as of late. The two of them have a spat over who will get to handle the request before the drunkard steps in and yoinks it. They suspect that Jinji is just doing it for money, but he tries to claim that he's doing it for Yukido's training. Shy Guy nervously introduces himself to them from behind a building. Jinji shoos them off and heads out with Yukido to handle the request. On the walk to the request site, he asks the drunkard about who the two he just met are. He explains that they are two low grunts from the Kaisen Shrine, always competing with one another despite their lack of experience. They are good friends though. Jinji thinks he'll be able to make good friends with them, which surprises the shy guy since he's afraid of losing control of his powers and hurting them. He doesn't need to worry about this since they are lay masters too, so they'll be able to keep themselves safe. He further explains that around this area, the Kaisen Shrine handles most of the manhwa-related incidents. Yukido wonders if it was okay for them to take the job request, but Jinji ensures him that it's cool since Kurama, who is the shrine's head priest, is his senior, so he'll probably be fine when Jinji informs him that he's doing this to train Yukido. He goes on to tell him more about the request. It's to purify a Matama that has been showing up around the canal area causing trouble. Matama are like fragments of life that spring from lei energy. They themselves aren't an issue, but they turn into Aramitama when they become corrupted. The primary job for lay masters is to handle these and purify them. Shy Guy thinks back to when they encountered one that they saw the other day, but the drunkard tells him that ones that large are rare. They should be able to easily handle the request since the people that put them in typically aren't so well versed on these things and get easily freaked out when Matama cause a little bit of trouble. While they talk, the water in the canal starts to ripple as a spot grows darker. The Aramitama is here. Much to the surprise of the both of them, when it shows up, it's a big one like the one they saw before. Jinji is already running off by the time Yukido turns to ask him for help. We go back to Yako and Shadowru going to talk to Kurama. They tell him about Jinji stealing a job request and taking Yukido to handle the job. He looks down pondering this. We see master and student urgently running away from the Aramitama before it catches up and blasts them. Downstream, an old man is fishing and ends up catching the two of them. The old man encourages them to pacify the Matama soon since it's probably suffering a lot. On their way back to the Matama, they decide to talk strategy. It's not a good idea for them to try to face it head on seeing how big it is. They sneak up on a vantage point to scout it. The Matama seems docile, currently just standing and waiting. Jinji wants Yukido to act as bait so he can finish it off. The shy guy is against this and they start having an argument. The Matama hears them and starts attacking the drunkard. With an opportunity to utilize his training, he summons a ball of water and attacks the Matama from behind with a blast. As it's recovering, Jinji has an opportunity to set up his own attack and coats his hands in a yellow energy. He blocks a blast from the Matama and palm strikes its head, causing the beast to fall apart, leaving a puddle of writhing water and empty beer cans. Yukido asks his master what he was doing last night since he remembers him coming home drunk. Jinji explains that he was hanging out in the area drinking with friends. He demonstrated his lay mastery and showed them his water control spell, but he doesn't remember what happened afterwards. The Matama turns out to be this same water he summoned and abandoned. It was able to maintain itself with outside moisture and ended up getting corrupted. It reforms itself and wants to go for round 2. it gets back to attacking its creator once again, now upon him ready to strike. Luckily for him though, Kurama shows up in the nick of time and dispatches of the Aramitama with a whirlwind. He encourages Jinji not to drink so much after saving him. Yakido thanks the shrine's head priest for saving the two of them, and he then picks up the shy guy, a force of habit from when he was younger. It turns out that Kurama also studied directly under Yukido's father. Later on that day, Kurama has tea over at Anu's house explaining that lay mastery spells function in a similar way to Mitama, so when not tightly cast, it can create space for Mitama to enter. Jinji's intoxicated state probably made the casting of the spell quite sloppy. Right now he's facing the repercussions of his actions, collecting litter with an embarrassing sign around his neck. He may have picked up Yukido's father's worst habits, but he has his own strengths as well. The three of them decide to have dinner, seeing as the drunkard won't be home for a while. Apparently Momoko's curry is incredible. Kurama warmly smiles as Yakido scoffs down the curry. Since the shy guy also loved the gravy when he was little, he would jump in joy every time he could smell it around dinner time. Yakido notes how beautiful the head priest's spells were, saying that that's how they're probably meant to be used. He responds telling him that lay mastery is for rectifying natural law and restoring harmony. He further explains why exactly Aramitama rampage. It's due to their suffering after losing control of their powers from being exposed to negative energy. They get returned to normality when they get pacified by a lay master. They may not be allies of humanity, but neither are they enemies. They can coexist peacefully once harmony is achieved, so the shy guy shouldn't be afraid of them. Jinji and Yakido are on a marine liner on their way to the first island. Waterboy is in complete awe at the water train, but the drunkard isn't so impressed, seeing as he's lived on the island all his life and has probably taken marine liners often. Jinji tells the inexperienced lay master that he'll get used to it in no time before taking a swig of beer. Yakido notices from a distance that the island seems different, seeing how many buildings there are on it as opposed to the other island they were on. He wonders what the island is like, with Jinji responding that it's way more urban than the second one. It even has pachinko parlors and casinos, very in line with his personality for him to focus on such things. Yakido, who is still curious about the train, asks Jinji if it's operated by lay mastery. Turns out it was used to put the tracks down, but otherwise, the train runs off of diesel. There's only one line, so there aren't many trains. Despite all the problems with them, they're pretty awesome. They make their way to the island and meet up with Anu at a place of his. He comments on how Yakido's acclimated a bit to the change of location and culture. The islands would be especially strange to someone who grew up on the mainland. He agrees, thinking back to being chased and attacked by an Aramitama by the canal on the second island. The mayor just wants him to get used to things at his own pace, and Jinji assures him he doesn't need to worry since he's taking care of Yakido after all. The mayor wants him to show Waterboy around the place since it's been a pretty good tourist destination as of late. He wants him to have some fun and wind down. It's lively in the city with stalls around selling street food and performers playing instruments for passers-by. It only takes one moment of Yakido not paying attention for Jinji to completely disappear from his view and start a commotion, bothering a stall vendor for some broiled thighs even though a person has already paid for and reserved the last one. Waterboy is able to talk the situation down and buys skewers for the two of them and jostles the drunkard away from the stall. When they clear out, some dude in a suit shows up at the stall and asks for the usual, presumably the broiled thighs. Despite having one of the skewers, Jinji is still pressed about what happened at the stall. Apparently, he heard from a friend that the broiled thighs there are really good. This surprises Yakido since he wasn't aware that he had friends on the first island even though he lives on the second. Off in the distance, they see a clown nimbly balancing on a ball while juggling flaming sticks in front of a crowd. They're completely mesmerized by the performance, and Yakido is captivated too and realizes the drunkard has disappeared when he turns back to talk to him. Upon looking back at the street performer, it seems that he's fallen off of the ball before it starts floating in the air. Unexpectedly, it becomes an Aramitama. Yakido is able to get the clown to the ground to help him avoid a blast of fire from the Mitama before he stands to face it. He intends to put his training to use, but almost gets hit by one of its flaming projectiles. Luckily for Yakido, the guy at the stall deflects it with a gunshot and proceeds to hose down the Mitama with deadly pelts before it can deal any more damage. He lands a final bullet to its dome as it struggles to get up. It seems that the guy recognizes Yakido somehow, and it turns out that he studied under Yakido's late father. His name is Ibuki. He notes of how Waterboy doesn't take after his dad at all, neither in appearance nor personality. He gets that pretty often. After some questioning, Ibuki reveals that he's authorized to use guns with bullets that contain a spell within each. The two of them proceed to head into a building. It's a business run by Ibuki called GOZ, Funnily, Jinji shows up at the bar wearing an apron. Yakido is understandably mad that he disappeared on him and came to the GOZ bar without even thinking to go and look for him, but the red-haired gunslinger cuts them off and offers Waterboy a seat. He tells Jinji about the Aramatama they saw in the city, and the conversation circles around to how a bookie dealing with the Matama looked completely different to when Kurama would pacify one. Kurama's lay mastery was beautiful and the Matama would be happy to be restored, but when it comes to Ibuki, the presence of the Matama can't even be sensed once he's done. This is due to them being completely exterminated. Ibuki isn't at all fond of the whole striking balance to create harmony thing that typical lay mastery involves. He just completely eliminates them and leaves no trace behind whatsoever. They don't get a chance to be restored and return to lay energy. He has no qualms with eliminating them, seeing as they end people. He'd rather deal with them quickly than try to pacify them. With how Ibuki talks about Haru, it's clear to see that they have quite the strained relationship despite both being students under the same master. He thinks pacifying Matama isn't worth it and that Kurama just cares about maintaining the harmony of lay energy and not the safety of people. He never cared about purifying Aramatama in the first place. To him it doesn't change the fact that they harm humans, so if one is in front of him he'll just end it. Ibra walks into the bar and reports back to the red-haired gunslinger about Makita finding the target. The smaller Matama they saw earlier was actually just an offshoot from the main body of a larger one somewhere on the island. With a keen eye, Yakido would have noticed that Aramatama's cores have a pupil and iris, but the one they fought earlier had neither. It was but a fragment spun off from another. Ibuki tells Jinji to take Yakido and return home while he handles business with the Matama. Being the main character he is, Waterboy isn't likely to heed this warning. They are walking down a street and talking about Ayaka Security, a company that Ibuki founded that officially is just a regular security company but acts as a front for Aramatama exterminators. Jinji isn't too bothered by it. He thinks they do a good job since they're able to pick off the few Matama that are able to bypass the barriers set around the second island. He notices that Yakido may see his own loss of control in the monsters, feeling that they can both be restored by pacifying them. The drunkard makes it clear that there's no point for him to sympathize with them since the Matama and Aramatama can't be measured using human standards. Assuming he's got it all figured out, it can come back to hurt him, so he wants Waterboy to be careful. The newbie laymaster wonders what Kurama thinks about Ibuki's methods. Unsurprisingly, he isn't fond of what the gun-wielding Matama Slayer does. He probably shouldn't mention one around the other since they don't get along at all. They have some issues between the both of them. Jinji forgot to get his allowance from Ibuki, so he runs off and tells Yakido to head back on his own. Like clockwork, a loud explosion is heard and a bunch of locals and tourists start running away. Naturally, he runs towards the trouble and shows up in front of the main body of the Aramatama. He's able to hit it with a blast of water, but it doesn't do anything to it. Before it can retaliate, a storm of bullets pelt the monster and pin it down. Jinji shows up and scolds him for getting into the action by himself. Ibuki and Ibra get into the mix and the Ayaka security employees stop their downpour of bullets. The drunkard asks him if he plans on using black magic and decides to go with a show not tell approach and demonstrates. After some chance, he transforms his right hand into a monstrous form. This is black magic. He absorbs the Matama's power and makes it his own. It's totally taboo in the world of lay mastery as it completely defies the ethos of it. The beast charges towards Ibuki, but he's able to stop it and sever its arm. He grips it by the core and forcefully rips it out, leaving Yakido shocked. The Ayaka security guys seem pleased with another victory. Ibuki talks to himself, vowing to become stronger than Haruaki, his master, and the dragon. He then crushes the core in his hand and drinks the nasty-looking fluid that came from it. Yakido and Jinji look on in horror. After that whole commotion, Yakido and Jinji make their way to the third island, which is the complete opposite to the previous one. It has a more peaceful and naturalistic vibe to it. However, Jinji is not too fond of their current location since it does not offer the chaotic and vibrant ambience he loves so much, and that is why he only visits the island for mandatory festivals. They are soon joined by Chotaro and Yako, who call out from a distance to Yakido and his teacher. Jinji doesn't like them very much and thinks that they are a bunch of idiots, but Waterboy entertains the idea of being friends with them since they are the same age. They all later climb up the mountain together while making small talk on how Yakido is finding the island. Not long after that mini exercise, they arrive at Kaisen Shrine and Yakido notices that it has a different energy than both the first and second island. Yako explains that the shrine is dedicated to the opposing dragon gods of water and fire, and since time of old, the dragons have lived on the fourth island, and whenever one of them went on a rampage, it is soon followed by disaster, and thus, the shrine was built to pacify them. The last time a disaster struck was when they were kids. The fire dragon went on a rage, but it was pacified by the water dragon. In that instant, Yakido begins to drift away deep within himself, but he is snapped out of it when Jinji sneezes. As they make their way closer to the shrine, Kurama joins them and welcomes Yakido to the temple before inviting him to a meeting. Since Waterboy is the son of his master, Kurama offers him candy and tries to make him feel extra welcome. Yakido is grateful for the offer, but he isn't there for sweets. He wanted to discuss his encounter with Ibuki. Kurama is surprised that their paths had crossed, so Yakido begins to relay what he witnessed of Ibuki's method of exorcising an erematama. Even though he was horrified by his ways, he just wants to understand why Ibuki and Kurama take such different approach despite them both being students of his late father. Rather than answering the question, Kurama does what all senseis do and asks him a question. He asks Waterboy to inform him on what he knows about ley energy. After giving his answer, Kurama takes it upon himself to expand Yakido's knowledge on the subject. He first goes over the basics of how a large current of ley energy flows beneath all the Ayaka Islands. Kurama then tells him to close his eyes and focus. He would be able to note that ley energy flows everywhere. This energy is especially potent on the Ayaka Islands as opposed to the mainland, where the energy is scant and can only be detected in historical shrines and special trees or rocks. Kurama informs him to direct his consciousness deeper, and with that, he should be able to detect the mainstream of ley energy, and it is from that energy that ley masters borrow power to weave their spells. As Kurama explains, Yakido seems to be diving deeper like he's looking for Bikini Bottom, but before he is consumed, Kurama taps him on the shoulder and asks him if he is okay. Yakido excitedly notifies him on the large stream of energy he detected within the earth, but Kurama warns him that it is dangerous for humans to venture too deep, and before he can finish his sentence, he seems to notice something strange about Yakido, but as he is about to ask him who he really is, a Matama distracts him from continuing his question. He uses the Matama to finally get back to the main issue regarding Ibuki. Yakido mentioned that he saw Ibuki eating the tainted Matama to become stronger, but Kurama informs him that once someone consumes an erematama, they themselves become tainted. This means that Ibuki is slowly becoming an erematama. Waterboy ponders within himself as to why Ibuki would take such a drastic measure to become stronger. Their meeting comes to an end, and as Yakido exits, he runs into his two homies Chotaro and Yako, who were waiting for him all this time to have a very serious conversation with him. But before that, we cut back to Kurama, who is having a conversation with Jinji regarding Yakido's training. They also touch on Ibuki's antics, and although he has the right sentiment on not wanting people to die, the way he is going about it is wrong. But Kurama points out that Ibuki's attitude is erroneous because the nature of life is for people to die, and therefore everything returns to ley energy. Elsewhere, the trio stroll down a pathway lined by trees to an open location. Yakido is blown away by the beauty and wonders where exactly they are. Chotaro and Yako begin to explain why they called him over and what the important topic of discussion is. The two of them decided that they would like to be friends with Yakido. He is so amazed by this, and this whole sequence was as though he went for a job interview and got the job. But before he is overtaken by joy, he thinks back to the day when he lost control of his powers and harmed the people he considered friends. Chotaro breaks his trail of thoughts and suggests that now that they are friends, he should vacate being under the tutelage of Jinji and come study under their master Kurama. Although they fail to convince him for now, the two reveal that where they stand is their training ground. Their master informed them that this location is the best place to measure the power level of a lay master. Chotaro takes a few steps forward and drops a seed to demonstrate what he means. He begins to chant a spell and focus his strength on the seed. It bursts open and sprouts what looks like the beginning of a tree. He stands proud over what he has done, and the other two walk over to inspect his work. Yako feels like he can do much better, so he follows the same steps and produces a mini tree that resembles his comrades', but he believes that his tree is much bigger. Naturally, Chotaro disagrees, so this leads to the two of them engaging in an argument about who produced the bigger tree. They try to get Yakido involved, but since he is a smart guy, he doesn't choose and just asks them to explain to him how it works. They articulate to him that all he needs to do is empty his mind and feel the ley energy. After that, he should unleash his body and direct the power into the seed. Now that he has been illuminated, they throw a seed on the ground for him to have a go. They tell him not to hold back and understand that since it is his first try, he most likely wouldn't be able to reach their level. I don't think these guys know that Yakido is the MC, but they will soon come to learn. Yukido copies their exact movements and pulls out a ridiculous amount of energy from the ground into the seed, which causes it to split clean open. The MC moment happens when the guy's plant expands and begins to grow at a rapid rate that you'd think he was trying to start a village hidden inside the leaves. His new friends are impressed with the display of might and therefore tell him to slow it down, but Yukido is unable to halt the growth of the tree, so it keeps expanding and even begins to bear fruits. Jinji watches from a distance and yells at him to learn how to ask for help when he is unable to deal with a situation. He descends to the ground and informs his student that harmony is everything. The aim is not to just use the power, but the ultimate goal is to control it. Jinji stands behind him and helps him put an end to the growth. It then blooms into flowers that match its surroundings. After helping his student out, he goes back to doing what he does best, which is getting drunk. Yukido turns around to see if his friends are okay. They take a long look at him before expressing how impressed they are by his power. Waterboy is shocked that after witnessing his ability, they aren't afraid of him. The two try once more to convince Yukido to study under their master, but he firmly refuses and decides to stick with Jinji. Later that night, we see the result of what Jinji, master of the bottle, got up to. Kurama covers him up before heading to the place where Yukido sprouted the new tree. He thinks within himself of how he noticed something strange and unusual when Waterboy was sensing ley energy earlier that day. He is so taken aback by what he witnessed that he begins to ask who exactly Yukido is. Yukido is later deep in training and forms a hexagon of water in front of him. Jinji thinks his work isn't too shabby and explains that typically, one would start by sensing the flow of ley energy before drawing upon, but in Waterboy's case, it's the opposite. He decides they'll focus on controlling the ley energy so it's not free-flowing. Yukido's sensei walks up to him and has him hold the water formation above his head before he hops on and encourages him to keep it under control. An earthquake happens out of nowhere and Yukido's eyes go into bootleg Jinchuriki mode. The water loses its form and Jinji falls right on top of his student. We see different characters' reactions to the earthquake. Kurama sits under a tree drinking sake as he feels the earthquake, and Ibuki is at his bar while it happens. Jinji pokes fun at his student, saying he needs more training if an earthquake is enough to startle him like that. In the morning, the earthquakes persist while Momoko and Waterboy eat breakfast. Ayaka's a volcanic island, so it makes sense for earthquakes to happen every so often. If worse comes to pass, they can just evacuate anyway. They've even got an emergency kit with enough helmets for everyone. Jinji shows up and asks for drinking money from her, and he is given some, much to the dismay of his student. He tells Waterboy that they're going to head to his master's grave once Yukido's done with his breakfast. As the drunkard gets a broom and fills a bucket with water, his student scolds him and says he's making sure that Jinji doesn't buy cheap drinks so he can pocket Momoko's change. As they walk up to Waterboy's late father's grave, they notice a congregation of a few matama around it. It turns out that they tend to gather around graves. Jinji shoos them away with his broom and starts cleaning up the grave, pouring water over it, adding greenery to the vases and pouring out 2 cups of sake in front of the grave. Yukido is entirely confused as to what they're doing and Jinji says they're paying respect. Waterboy actually wanted to know if they are at the grave due to the earthquake, but he's cut off by some locals greeting Jinji before he can get his answer. The 3 elderly people also came to pay their respects in hopes that Yanagi can protect the island since it seems that the fire dragon is in a bad mood. The drunkard has a few snacks from one of the ladies and asks his student to join them. The old heads nostalgically talk about how much Yukido has grown since they last saw him back when the island was evacuated 10 years ago. They all survived the major eruption back then due to Waterboy's late father's actions. Somehow, despite his stay on the island so far, Yukido doesn't know about what his dad did on that day. Jinji initially planned on telling him about it later on, but decides to expound on what happened. It turns out that the earthquakes that were happening recently were due to the fire dragon. The volcanoes under the island get more active as it grows more powerful. 15 years ago, the lake on the 4th island dried up and the water dragon disappeared. This disharmony disrupted the balance between fire and water. Unless something is done, the 4th island's volcano will eventually erupt, sinking all of the islands. The tragedy that struck 10 years ago was this eventuality, and it was Yanagi Makoto who stepped in and handled the situation. He suppressed the dragon's power using the ritual of dragon pacifying all by himself. And that is why 10 years later, the island is in a peaceful era as a result of his display of heroicism. Yukido doesn't really get it, but he at least understands that his dad was a pretty amazing guy. He looks over to Jinji and catches him looking pretty dejected, a far cry from his typical demeanor. He reverts to his usual self and offers a drink to Waterboy after brushing it off. Of course Yakido isn't old enough to drink yet. Out of the corner of his eye, he spots Ibra also at the graveyard. Jinji tries to call her over and get her to join them, but she pretty much airs him and walks off. It turns out that it's actually the anniversary of her parents' deaths. Jinji takes some of the plants from Yanagi's grave and takes it to the other grave to pay respects to her mother and father. Yukido's in his own world wondering why Ichiju was upset while they were at Yanagi's grave before. He gets derailed from his trail of thought when he sees a set of keys on the floor. Next we see of the pair. They're all the way back at the first island to see Ibra so they can return her keys to her. Jinji's just happy to have an excuse to be on the first island. Waterboy seems a bit nervous about the whole thing and isn't sure if him and Ibra are going to get along well. His homies, Yako and Chotaro, pull up and greet the two of them. They're on the first island at Kurama's behest to check on the towns due to the ley energies on the islands as a result of the earthquake. So far they haven't encountered any problems, but they'll still remain vigilant as they patrol. The conversation meanders towards what Jinji and Yakido are doing on the island. They explain that they're going to return a lost item. The Yatoroka duo assume they're taking it to the police box and offer to come with them, but Yakido explains that they already know who it belongs to and they're going to Ayaka security to hand it to Ibra. This spooks the two of them and they decide they should be on their way instead, using their patrol as an excuse. It makes sense since things between Ayaka security and their master Kurama aren't so great. Over at Ayaka security, Ibuki and Taihei are at the bar while another earthquake happens. With the increase in quakes, Aramitama activity and fire energy are getting stronger, so things don't look too good. The master and student enter intending to give Ibra her keys. Ibuki heads out and warns the pair, telling them they should be careful since things can get rough. Assumedly he's predicting an Aramitama spawning in and going crazy. Taihei welcomes them in and they explain the current situation with the keys and what happened at the graveyard. He elucidates that in the culture of the Ayaka Islands, it's typical for the residents to send off the dead with a smile, but it's probably still difficult for her. Waterboy is a bit curious as to how Ibra's parents died and asks. Taihei tells them that some years back, a fire Aramitama grew large enough to burn a house down. The boss was able to step in and take it down, but not before it killed her parents. People's lives and the actions of Mitama are all determined by the flow of ley energy. That's just how things are, so they might as well be accepted with a smile. A lot of people can't accept that, and therefore exterminate Aramitama as an outlet. Yakido is just glad that they are able to deliver the lost item to her and asks Taihei to give it to Ibra in their stead. Taihei suggests that he gives it to her himself. She's shy, but she's a good kid. He actually gives her a phone call and has her come over so she can be handed the keys. An awkward face-off ensues, but Yakido gives her the keys after a prompt from Jinji. She's so shy that Taihei has to tell her to thank him for the keys. She comes out of her shell a little bit and thanks Yakido for his kind gesture. He then proceeds to apologize for parting on an important day for her. Ichiju isn't bothered by it, but a large quake happens. Not an earthquake this time, but an Aramitama, and apparently one with a lot of fire energy. The shy lay master rushes out to jump into the action. She tends to act recklessly when a fire Mitama is involved due to her past. The master and student head out to try and stop her. We see a conversation between Ibuki and the mayor. Inu commends Wish version of Shanks for pacifying a Mitama that appeared in the tourist area recently. The barrier that's supposed to stop them from forming in the tourist island are still functional, but is starting to become ineffective because of the rise in fire energy. They are expecting an eruption similar to what happened 10 years ago soon, and all islands may have to be evacuated. Even back then, with Yanagi suppressing the eruption, the first and second islands were hit and evacuated. It's ironic how the restoration efforts on the island will end up leading to more damage being sustained. Ibuki has to leave as the fire Mitama starts getting active. Jinji and his student are at the scene. He helps a woman trapped in a burning building with lay mastery and tells Yakido to go ahead and find Ibra. Yako and Chotaro are also on their way to the Aramitama but are quickly passed by Ibra. She wastes no time using her electric lay mastery to get further ahead. Waterboy is also on his way to find Ichiju. The fire Mitama corners two civilians, but Ibra gets in the mix before they can be hurt. She's having a tough time fighting the Mitama, having flashbacks to her parents dying, but is determined to no longer run away from her issues. She gets a few hits in, but the Mitama ends up grabbing and throwing her. It charges up a massive blast of fire, but Waterboy makes it in time and blocks the wave with a shield of water. This act makes her think back to when Ibuki saved her from the fire Mitama years ago. Yakido asks if she's alright, and she just continues to stare on, bringing the episode to an end.